Thank you for joining us on the Sport Chippers YouTube page. As you can see, not a bad day here in sunny Sydney. Once again, beautiful spot. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to be joined by Martin Fisher, who was my predecessor at the BBC in Nottingham. So once he left, I was very fortunate to get the job and kind of step into his shoes. But he was very much a commentator in the days when Forest were in Europe, and he also got to work an awful lot with Brian Clough. So there are some terrific stories on the way about his time working alongside Cloughy is probably too strong a phrase to use, but certainly covering Forest when Cloughy was the manager, and also when Forest went into Europe under Frank Clark, and you'll hear some good stories about that and about working closely with Stan Collymore as well. Thank you to all of those who've subscribed so far and given us a like, got in touch with a comment or two as well. Really appreciate your support. We're going to hear from Martin Fisher though on the Sport Chippers YouTube page next. Well, Martin, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Really appreciate it from your home within a stone's throw of the City ground still. I wonder how much fondness you have when you look back at your time covering Nottingham Forest.
Yeah, it seems just such a long time ago now, Robin, because I guess it is an awful long time ago. And I suppose it makes me smile sometimes because people say, footballers say about people that get to a cup final, did they get to a cup final too early when they were 19 or something? And I sometimes think that, when I was at Radio Nottingham, as a very young man, very wet behind the ears broadcaster, it was Wembley, Wembley, Wembley all the time, not just with Forest as well, Notts County also. So there were some fantastic days there. Yes,
things changed once you left, really. And those Wembley trips did not become so regular. In fact, I don't think Radio Nottingham had one with Forest, certainly since you left. Is that right?
No, I can't take any credit or any blame for the fact that things have not remained at that level. But yeah, I bailed out in '99 just as David Platt entered the building. And it was probably the wisest move I've ever made.
Yes, and if you're trying to work out at home the kind of crossover, I replaced you. Effectively, I got your job, and I always said that we should have worked together because fish and chips on a Saturday afternoon went together perfectly, whereas chips and fray was never quite the same. It never caught on in the same way. But there we are. I mean, when you look at the kind of time you covered, it wasn't the glory days, obviously, of the European Cup winning days. But it's probably the second best spell in Forest history, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think looking back on it now, and there was a period within that where we were referring to it as the second coming. It was Brian Clough's second coming at Nottingham Forest, really. And if you think about, they were always challenging in the league, so it was always sort of top six of the league. But it was the cups where they really, really made their mark, particularly in the League Cup where they reached those finals and lifted it twice in '89 and '90. They were great days.
What was it like working under Brian Clough as a member of the media, particularly the local media, because he had his relationships, didn't he, with one or two national journalists? But from your perspective, trying to get pre-match and post-match material, how straightforward was that?
Oh, it was anything but straightforward because it was very rarely there. And the old idea that is now the norm of speaking to the manager after every game didn't happen. Brian Clough was not around. You'd probably get the goal scorer. You'd never spoke to Clough after the game, and very rarely was he around before the game to speak to either. So it was frustrating.
And would he do anything with you? A couple of times a season, 10 times a season? How regularly would you talk to him? I genuinely have no idea because things have changed so much.
That's the other thing. So how long was I at Radio Nottingham for? I think I was at Radio Nottingham for about 9 or 10 years. I think in that time, I probably spoke to Brian one-to-one 4 times.
Right.
4 times. Yeah, in all that spell. You would go down on a Friday hoping to do the players or one of the players, and you'd catch them as they came in and try and grab a word at the Jubilee Club there. Some were better than others. Some would just blank you completely. Others would say, "Oh, mate, I'll do you afterwards," and you stay there for the 2 hours to wait until they'd finished training. But in terms of doing Brian, very rarely was he there. If he was, he'd come out of the Jubilee Club doors and say, "Oh, Brian, any chance of a, all right, son," he'd say, and he wouldn't even look at you. He'd just know that you were there, acknowledge your presence, and walk the other way. And you go, "Oh, right, okay." So I remember when we did retire, we were told we'd get an audience with him, and we were very excited about that. We thought, "Oh, this is the time." Waited all this time to do an interview with him. So as you do, you kind of pen down what sort of questions you're going to ask him. I thought, I've got to do the whole career at Forest. This is the time. I've got all these points written down. Trevor Francis, Championship, European Cup, the second coming, blah, 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 and retirement. And what happened was that we went down. It was the night that Forest were playing Notts County in the County Cup final. And we went down to do him, me from Radio Nottingham, and Darren Fletcher was at, I think it was Gem then, so the independent radio station. We're both very excited and nervous as to what would come, but primed for this interview of all interviews with the man. We got into his office and we sat down on his settee, and his secretary came in and said, "He's not got long." We thought, "Oh, well, that's not a good start." And then when he came in, he got a flat cap on. He used to wear a flat cap in those days. And he walked in, he looked at us both, and he said, "Right, I've not got long." And then as we sort of waited for us to be given the nod to then go and talk to him, he took off his cap and he took aim. And we were both looking at each other. We were like naughty schoolboys, looking at each other and looking at him, thinking, what's he doing? What's he doing? So he'd taken off his cap and he chucked it across his office, which was quite large. And there was a hat stand on the far side. And he was trying to get his cap to hit the coat stand like James Bond did. And of course he missed. And his secretary, who was there as well, ran across to pick up the cap and bring it back. And he had another go. And he missed again. And me and Darren are looking at our watches thinking, well, if we've not got long, we're not going to start until he hits that thing, we ain't going to get very long at all. So he missed. Carol went across, picked it up again, and we thought, for God's sake, Carol, if he misses again, just leave it there. We've got work to do. So he did, and then he came across. He said, "Who's first?" And I think I did go first. So I started. And of course, I've got this long list. The other thing with Cloughy is never, ever have a list of questions, because I've been told before that what he'd done before to people when they did that was he'd just lean over, grab it, and chuck it. So you kind of got your sort of notebook, but you put it away so he didn't know. So you start your questions. So I kicked off mine with whatever, nice little half volley to get him started. And he went off on a tangent, and then he came back and he went off on another tangent. And then I'd literally asked 2 or 3 questions. And then he said, "Son, you've had your turn. Bugger off." And then he went to Darren, and Darren got about 3 minutes as well. And it was like, I waited all this time to do the interview with Brian Clough, and you get about 60, 80 seconds with him. But there was another famous time with Brian where I don't know if I think it probably is. I've not been into the inner sanctum at Forest for a while, but where the offices were, there was a little corridor where you then walk through the trophy room and all that kind of thing. And I think it was raining outside, so we'd actually been allowed to come in, and we were sat in this corridor, and Cloughy used to walk past occasionally. And if he did, everybody was silent, and you just had to sit really still and let him go past. And he walked past, and on this occasion, it was me. I think Darren was there again, and Ian Edwards was there at the time for the Evening Post. So we're all sat there, again, all hoping that we'd get a few players and maybe a chance of a word with the manager, but not expecting to. But we were inside, so we thought, well, there's a chance we might get to speak to him. And he walked past. "Morning," to all of us. "Morning, morning, Brian, morning, Brian." And then he turned around and said, Which one of you has been slagging off my goalkeeper?" We all looked around, we thought, well, that could be all of us, to be fair. Cross was having a bad time at the time. "Which one of you has been slagging off the goalkeeper?" So we stayed silent. I thought, well, I know that I've had a pop in the past. I think it was probably around about the time the Portsmouth Cup tie quarter-final.
Right.
Fans will remember it. He dropped one, and I think it was McLaughlin tapped it in, and they were knocked out of the cup. So eventually I said, I think that about me might have been me, Brian. Might have been me. Right, son. Well, I'm going to sue you. Right. I thought I was not up to wasn't up to my legal skills. I don't know if you can sue somebody for saying that somebody is fairly poor in goal. So I kind of took a punishment. Thought that might be it. And then he turned on his heel and he said, actually, son, it's not you to blame because you're just doing your job. I'll sue the bloke that's employing you, though. I'll sue the producer. And he walks in, and I thought, well, actually, I'm the producer as well. I produce and commentate and present. I said, and you know when you say something, you think, I really shouldn't have said that. I said, Brian, I am the producer as well. Right, I'll sue you twice. So I then was told, he disappeared. The secretary came back and said, I don't think you need to stay. So I left. And of course, to double my punishment, he then did a brilliant interview for the paper, a brilliant interview for the rival radio station. And I was the one that was kicked out into touch because of something I'd said about the goalkeeper. That was actually fair comment, you know what I mean? But they were a couple of the incidents with Brian Clough. But generally, we very, very rarely saw him.
Different days, aren't they? Compare that to now, where the expectation is you work for Match of the Day commentating now it goes out on a Saturday evening or a Sunday evening, and you see the manager and players afterwards. And what people may not realise is that contractually the manager is brought to you, isn't he, within half an hour, 20 minutes or something like that? They have to be there.
I think it's less than half an hour. I think it's about 15 minutes now,
right.
Which just about gives us time to get down from the gantry all the way down the stairs, through the fans, out onto the pitch level, just in time for the managers to come out. I mean, for the BBC, again, you commentate and then you do the interviews afterwards. For our colleagues at Sky, they tend to have, certainly when it's a live Sky game, they'll have a commentator upstairs who, as soon as the game's finished, that's them done. But they'll have, as you remember, and as the people watching will know, they'll have their designated reporter downstairs who is ready to do the interview straight away. So if the manager comes out within 2 minutes of the game finishing, they're there ready to go. It might not get broadcast absolutely live, but they're ready to do it live. We aren't. And that has caused problems in the past because at a place like Everton, not only have you got to get down from the roof at Goodison, through the fans, down onto the basement, through the away fans, but you're also on the opposite side of the ground. So you then got to walk from one side to the other side to get ready to do the interviews there. So, and all the time thinking, what questions, you know.
So you dealt with Cloughy to start with, which was quite an introduction, but you had not as many managers as Forest get through these days, and most clubs get through these days, but you had a spell of obviously Frank Clark succeeding him, Dave Bassett, Stuart Pearce, and then Ron Atkinson. How did you find them to deal with, in comparison to, say, obviously Brian Clough, who's, his royalty effectively and did what he liked, understandably, at the club?
Well, Frank was an absolute dream. Frank Clark was fantastic. I've not seen him for a while, but I used to occasionally bump into him at the local gym. So he was still down there doing his stuff, as was Liam O'Kane as well. And occasionally John Robertson was down there. But I digress. Frank Clark was great. And the thing about that was when Cloughy retired in '93, it looked for a long time as though Martin O'Neill would get the job. He was at Wycombe, he'd done very well. And he was kind of first choice, I think, for most fans. But the board decided to go with Frank Clark. And I remember at the time initially being a little bit disappointed. But the first time I met Frank, I thought, this is going to be good, in terms of building a relationship with a manager. As you will well know, it's great to have that contact. It's great for them to know who you are, what you're trying to do, for them to give you their time, give you a few steers every now and again. And Frank did all that, which, of course, Brian before him hadn't done. So that was refreshing. And of course, when Frank came in, he got a massive job on his hands because there was expectation at Forest to bounce back straight away. But as they've demonstrated very aptly since relegation in 1999, it's very difficult to do. But he made it look very easy, made some terrific signings with obviously Stan Collymore. Colin Cooper was great, but other players like David Phillips, Lars Bohinen, and just knitted those together with Stuart Pearce, who we managed to keep. And it was a fabulous season ultimately, and it was a great time under him.
And that era,
I mean,
sorry, Fish, I was going to say that era actually gets overlooked quite a lot. But that was actually, from when you look back now, particularly from now, that was a very successful era for the club.
Well, it was fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I mean, I think there'd be Forest fans now that would say the promotion campaign of 93, 94 was exhilarating. Probably more exciting than the one that came under Dave Bassett a few years later, in my view, because of the football that they played, and because in Stan Collymore, I think we all appreciated almost immediately, wow, this guy is special. This guy is special. And the fact that he could score such exciting goals, not many of his were tap-ins. They tended to be dribbles from the halfway line, shugging his way past defenders and then thumping it into the top corner. A lot of his goals were masterful. And it was obviously all culminated in the trip to Peterborough that was away from home. So it's a little bit more dramatic, if you like, and Forest took over Peterborough that day, and it was magnificent. But then the second season, so the first season back in the Premier League, they just took to it like a duck to water. They were I think they finished third that season, but I remember them playing Man United down here at the time when the Trent End was being redeveloped, and Stan scored another great goal in that one, and they'd signed Brian Roy, I think, over the summer after the World Cup in '94, and Brian Roy just added that little bit more quality up top, just to help turn games. Lars Bohinen was great that season. The defence was relatively solid, certainly more solid than it had been in the relegation season, and it was just exciting times. You felt for the first time in a while that Forest could actually compete with the very best in the top flight. You know, Liverpool, I think they gave them a game. Manchester United, they certainly did. And the other sides that were around at the top at that time as well were all taken on. Many of them were beaten. And I think they finished third that year. And obviously qualified for Europe, which was another adventure to go on.
And how much fun is that as a reporter covering that kind of campaign? Because I would imagine people say, oh, you're off on holiday, every couple of weeks in a UEFA Cup campaign. But I mean, from my experience doing things overseas, mine was limited to Carl Froch rather than Forest in Europe. But they are hard work, those trips. Enjoyable, but hard work.
Yeah, I mean, certainly it was me and Colin that went across because we didn't have the budget to have a summariser. Now everybody has summarisers, and quite rightly too, because it adds different voice, another slant on things, and the input of an expert who's either played or managed, knows how the inner machinations of football. We couldn't afford to do that, so it was me and Colin that went away, and we basically just split what we had to do between us. So obviously we'd got the programme that we had to do and the commentary, but also input towards other radio Nottingham programmes. So you'd be doing stuff for breakfast, stuff for evening programme, etc., etc. And I remember, so where did we go? So I think the first trip was Malmo, Sweden. So that was good, very expensive, but good. And we were working, did the game, flight late at night, back, got into home about 3-4 o'clock in the morning, back to work the next day about 9. And then to be greeted as you got in the office, oh, how was your holiday then? Was it fun? You think, holiday, we've not stopped, you know. The game kind of almost is incidental in the middle of it all. And you're just constantly working. And I can't remember, I mean, mobile phones wouldn't have been around then, so that would have been more of a technical problem as well, to actually dial through from the hotel room. Trying to do quality broadcasts on a phone line was difficult also. Where else did we go then? So Malmo would have been first, and I think we went to France and played a team called Auxerre. Oh, I think it was pronounced Auxerre, but Auxerre is how it's spelt. Little ground in France, middle of nowhere. Again, we flew home on a chartered jet that I think Forest must have chartered, and I remember us dashing from the ground on the coach to get back to the airport, which is a tiny little airport, local airport, probably a bit like Tollerton in Nottingham, very small. And I think it was a very small plane, and it was a very small staircase that got you into the plane. And so for the players, it was fine. For me, it was fine. But for the bigger chaps on the party, and there were a few on the board then, and there was one very famous former player who was a summariser.
Was he a centre half?
Yeah, who found it a little bit more challenging than marking the best centre forwards in Europe back in his day, I think. But he saw the funny side of it because Forest had won and they got through that. Then they played, I can't remember if there was another round, but they certainly finished up playing Bayern Munich. And the first game was in the Olympic Stadium. And of course, it brought back all those memories that you and I would love. Let's dig back in the archives. Let's get the 1979 European Cup final. So we dug out all those. So it was fantastic from a programme point of view. From a supporter point of view, brilliant. For the players, magnificent. And we flew out, I think we flew out the day before, and we were able, because I wanted to go to the Munich training ground to see if we could get anything from the opposition. And yeah, we got there, and back in the day, I mean, Forest training ground is fantastic now, but back in the day then it was, just a field round the corner from
by the river. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but we went to the Bayern Munich. It was like, oh, this looks good, after some training pitches and nice building and players milling around. And it was kind of, well, who do we recognise? Well, we recognise Jurgen Klinsmann. He's there. And there's Lothar Matthäus. Can we get any chance of those, And it became, and of course they didn't have press officers then. So you didn't have to go to somebody and say, can you arrange an interview with, which is good news in a way, because you'll probably get it more often than not, but it's not as exciting. And it was kind of, I always used to kind of compare it to when you're a young fella and you're in a nightclub and you see a girl across the way you think is quite attractive. And it's kind of, have I got the nerve to go up and ask her? And if I go up and ask her and she says yes, fantastic, it's brilliant. But if you go up and she says no, clear off, you feel deflated. And it was a bit like that with player interviews at Forest in the early 90s, and certainly at Bayern Munich that day. Do I go there and get turned down by Lothar Matthäus and I look so embarrassed in front of everybody else, or does he say yes? And it's like, oh, great, Lothar Matthäus has spoken. So, got a long story short, though it's fairly long already. Lothar Matthäus said yes, and it was a bit of a pooled interview, so I was doing the questions. So I was asking the question, I can't remember what we spoke about, but the game, who did you know, the Forest team, da-di-da-di-da. So often, finished my bit of the interview, then other people dive in, and as Lothar Matthäus just turning on his heel as though he's going to go. And one of I won't mention who he was, but one of my colleagues from the local press, as he turned, said, oh, one more question. Jurgen, one more question. Oh. Lothar Matthäus turned around and said, it's Lothar! Lothar! And cleared off. Of course, what we didn't realise then, but has since been repeated over and over again, is that whilst there were teammates, Lothar Matthäus and Jurgen Klinsmann did not get on at all.
Oh, right.
They were sworn enemies. So the worst thing you could have ever called Lothar Matthäus was Jurgen.
Fantastic. I mean, great memories and obviously great times under Frank Clark, but then it kind of, the beginning of the unravelling kind of happened. And you worked with Stuart Pearce, Dave Bassett, who obviously won promotion, but that felt more temporary, didn't it? That spell in the Premier League, and then on to Ron Atkinson. Yeah,
it was a funny one with Dave Bassett, because again, when he came in, because there was this horrendous thing going on behind the scenes where there was a takeover going on. Frank was kind of struggling with the players on the pitch. Results were poor. needed the takeover done and dusted or forgotten about, and it just seemed to drag on and on. And then eventually, I think it was Irving Scholar was one of the people that was involved in the takeover. And then before you knew it, Frank had gone, Pearce had come in temporarily, and then out of the blue, Dave Bassett was brought in. And it just seemed an odd fit, because not least was Dave Bassett heavily associated with a style of play that was very different to what Forest had played under Frank Clough, and as Brian Clough had always preached, if you want to play football, you play it on the floor, keep it on the grass, not up in the clouds. And of course, Wimbledon and Sheffield United, it was very much get it forward as quickly as possible, win the first ball, and then do something with that. So that seemed odd. Plus, of course, I've got nothing against Southerners, but he was a Southerner. He was seen to be a bit of a Cockney Barrow boy, really, by a lot of Forest fans. And he came in initially to kind of work with Pearce, but you thought, well, that's not going to work. Then he got the job. And to be fair to him, that promotion season of 97, 98 was brilliant. Pierre Van Hooijdonk was here. He was a great forward, certainly at that level, took terrific free kicks. Kevin Campbell was scoring goals at that level as well. Colin Cooper was still around. Stuart Pearce obviously was still playing. So everything was ticking along very nicely. The difference between Harry and Frank was that you never really felt that you knew Harry Bassett. Right. He didn't kind of engage. It was great. He'd always do interviews and stuff, and he'd always do long interviews, and he'd have opinions about various things. But you never felt as though he particularly knew who you were and what your role was within the whole fabric.
It was business-like rather than... Because I always find the best managers are those you get on with on a human level rather than as a kind of business transaction, in that I'm going to interview you now, you're going to give me answers, I'll ask you questions, this is how it works, and once we're done, finished, we go our separate ways.
And off we go. Yeah, exactly. And so Frank was very different to that. Harry was like that. And always with Harry, the thing we used to joke about was his answers would always be roughly the same duration. It was like he took a big deep breath, and then by the time he'd lost his breath, he'd finished talking. He'd go like that, and he stopped. And I once stopped him in his tracks with one question, and it must have been very early on in his time at Forest, just by asking him. I said, do you feel as though Forest is the right kind of club for you? Because, what you said, Cloughy and Clark played a certain way, and you're renowned for a different kind of style. And I said, I think the word that I used that he objected to was thuggery. Which,
I can understand that from his point of view.
Yeah. You can't quite think of the right question. You get to the end of your sentence, you think, what's that word? What's that word? What's that word? You say, so, blah, blah, about, the style at Wimbledon and Sheffield United, that more physical, that more kind of thuggish approach. Well, I don't think we were thugs. We played a game, it's not illegal, blah, blah, blah. And he went off. But he was fine. He's not, it was also not the kind of bloke that would hold it against you for asking a bad question or criticising him as well. He was very fair with all that. And then, of course, he went, having done poorly at the start of the Premier League campaign, and we had this farcical situation of Ron Atkinson being appointed. And I think he was certainly on holiday in the Caribbean. I think it was Barbados, and it is over 20 years ago now, but I think that the story was that he said, I'll come, but only when my holiday is finished. And straight away, they're not good vibes, are they? The club is in crisis. It's January, February, bottom of the table, certainly bottom three. We've not got time here. If you're committed, come in straight away, feet under the table, sort it out. And he was exactly the kind of character you just described, that he would do an interview and then off, and he was away. But again, he didn't do many interviews. And so, the team was struggling big time anyway, but you just felt that this guy is never going to turn it around because he's not really that interested. It was almost like he felt that it was a short-term fix. It might probably a good payday for him for over that period, and it might get him a bigger job if he makes a success of it.
Just going to round things up with your favourite game and favourite player.
Oh, God.
In your spell. I mean, I don't mean, you can bring in games for Match of the Day as well if you like, but I'm thinking particularly of your time at covering Forest.
Forest, yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, there were so many. It's both players and games. I suppose my first outing really for Radio Nottingham was at Wembley, a Littlewoods Cup final in 1989. So that will always be a special one because it was probably the first time I'd done anything broadcasting, and I just had a dream gig that day. I wasn't commentating then. I was very, very junior. Basically, I think I was employed really because nobody else could be bothered to go down and stand at the Jubilee Club for 3 or 4 hours waiting for somebody to actually talk to them. But I was sort of saying, well, I'll do it. I like the idea of talking to footballers, so I did that. Anyway, my job at Wembley was just to add a bit of colour to the proceedings while main commentators were upstairs. Was could you sit behind the goal and every now and again, if we want to just get another angle of the goal, just talk about what it was like from where you were. And maybe you might be able to grab an interview with somebody after the game. Oh, yeah, I can do that. I can do that.
See, you have to excuse me, but in a previous chat with Colin Frey, I mentioned that anybody who's anybody at Radio Nottingham, who's ever worked even half a shift at Radio Nottingham Sport, has done something at Wembley. And you seem to fit that profile then in 1989, in that you'd done half a shift, waited for some footballers and gone to Wembley, and he's still waiting for his day at Wembley. So anyway, carry on. I do apologise.
But not just go to Wembley and be stuck at the back of the stand.
No.
I was at Wembley, on the pitch virtually, probably 10, 15 yards to the side of the goal where Forest scored their 3 in the second half. And to be that close to the football, I mean, you've got a sign of it when you used to present from the touchline. But when you're behind the goal in a cup final... Yeah,
I hope Colin's not watching this.
it is one of those moments where you do sort of pinch yourself and think, I can't quite believe that I'm here and I'm doing this. And there's Nigel Clough. And I think it was Les Seeley was in goal for Luton. And he was like, you felt that he was almost touching distance. You certainly could have gone, "Oi, Les, watch out, son!" And he would have turned around and looked at you. And I also remember in the build-up to that, I'd had a cold in the week building up to it, so I had to pass a late fitness test to go. And I was coughing and spluttering a bit on the journey down. But I didn't feel 100%, but there was no way I was going to miss that. And then, yeah, Colin, if you are watching, switch off now because it was then.
Oh, he's gone. He went minutes ago.
So then it was the Simod Cup final a couple of weeks later. Then we had Hillsborough. We've not mentioned Hillsborough.
Oh, of course,
because Hillsborough was in and around that time as well. And again, as a very junior member of the sports team, I was there. And I think it was because the next year there was an idea that I might start doing some reporting. So it'd be a good idea if I got to see what it was like on another big occasion. So you've done a final. Let's go and do a semi-final. So it was Hillsborough. So, I mean, that obviously was horrendous, to put it mildly. And I was sat in an overspill to the press box. And where I was sat, I was actually in amongst where the wives of the Liverpool players were. And I was close to the Leppings Lane end than my colleagues who were doing the commentary on the game. So you could see it all unfolding before the game. Just the fact that side of the ground was packed, and the Forest end to the right, the Cop, he just looked and thought, well, yeah, it's obviously got lots of Forest fans in, but I can see spaces there in the middle section there. I can't see any, but to the two sides I can. This is bizarre. And then when we kicked off, and it was an exciting start. And you just saw one or two fans come on. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that felt it at the time, but you thought, oh, it's some kind of crowd invasion. But why would they be running on the pitch at that stage? And then as you looked a bit closer, you saw that they weren't trying to attack any player or anything like that, but they were going up to players. I think one went up to the referee just to say, look what's going on. You've got to get something to sort this out. And then obviously everything unfolded, and eventually then I was. I think I had to interview the Forest chairman, Maurice Roworth, was back in the day. I interviewed him because the commentators and the presenter just had to stay where they were. So with the old Ewer that you'll know, but the old recording device, I was able to take that around and go and speak to some fans that had come across and whatever, and just to try and get the flavour of what was going on that horrendous day. So that would certainly be memorable, but in the wrong reasons. And then, later on, we've mentioned that the promotion under Frank Clark. The last day for Brian Clough at against Sheffield United at home, his last game at home, that was very emotional. And the fact that Forest had been relegated was almost incidental. It was kind of, we'll deal with that. The bigger story here is that Brian Clough is leaving the club after 1976 having arrived. So how many years was it for? 14, a lot of years. Yeah, a lot of years, a lot of success. And so it was just so, again, that was so wrong in so many ways. For him to actually finish at the club on such a low after bringing so many highs was cruel. And then you've got the promotion to Frank at Peterborough, magnificent day, tremendous climax. If you want to script how to get promoted, it's to do it from a radio point of view. Certainly it's to do it away from home. So you've got loads of people at home listening, and to come from being behind, I think there were 2 down in that game, got back to 2-2. I think a point might in the end have been good enough, but to win it in the fashion that they did with Collymore's goal was just amazing. The trips to Europe were brilliant. And the win at Sheffield Wednesday, 7-1 against Sheffield Wednesday at Hillsborough. That was incredible. I remember a win at Manchester United as well. I think when Woney I think it was the game when United effectively lost the title in 92. Right. I think Forest went up there and won on Easter Monday 2-1, I think. And I'm sure Ian Wone scored one of them, a cracker with his left foot. Got a lot of those. And Leeds overtook them in the end, and Man United had to wait another year for the title. So, yeah, there's quite a few. Even the FA Cup final.
Sorry, Colin, I've tried to stop him.
So the semi-final when they thrashed West Ham was magnificent, but in the end it was 4-0. So it's not even close, this one. But then to do the FA Cup final in '91 against Tottenham, Gazza against Cloughy, brilliant day. And little did we know that was almost the end of the run of Wembley's, because it just seemed every year Forest would be. I think they went twice again the next year, but that was the end of it. And of course, the history of Forest might have been different had they won that day. Obviously, they would have won the FA Cup for the first time since the 50s. But also, maybe Brian Clough would have retired then, and he would have gone out on the high of winning the FA Cup as he deserved to, rather than on the low of relegation 2 years later. And a new guy might have come in and built on that team of 91, which was a very good side, and just taken them on. But it was almost like a turning point for Forest, and they were never quite as good again. And it was a slippery slope after that. But it was a great experience. My only disappointment that day was there were 3 goals scored. And as a commentator, we were sharing commentary responsibilities then. I didn't get any of the blinking goals. So that was disappointing. But I did get Crossley's penalty save of Gary Lineker. So that was good.
Colin Fray sends his sympathies on that, by the way. He's very upset on your behalf. Just on player to wrap things up. The aforementioned Colin went for Collymore. I wondered whether you'd go down the same route.
Yeah, probably, because the 2 seasons he was at the club, he was incredible, and as well, he was a fabulous fella. Really good. I remember the first interview I did with him, and he'd only be 20, 21. He cost a lot of money. And, that time when you do the new signing for the first time, you're thinking, well, I wonder what he's going to be like. Great if he's great on the pitch, but it's even better if he's good off the pitch as well. And I sat down in the old Forest dugout to do an interview with him. And in those days, we did reel-to-reel tapes, and the reel was about 15 minutes long. So you'd think, well, that'll be good enough for most interviewees. You probably get 2 interviews on that. And I remember we filled it with no problem at all. And he was very articulate, very thoughtful on the game. And that was at 21. And then with the 2 years that he played at Forest, he was outstanding. Although I'd have to say that his helpfulness actually rebounded on him because of an interview he did with me. When he left to join, or when he was leaving in the summer of '95 to join Liverpool or Everton at the time, we got wind of it, and I managed to get him on his he got a mobile phone. Not many people did at that time. I managed to get hold of him on his mobile phone, did an interview with him just to sort of talk about what the situation was. Did he think he might stay, or was he definitely moving? And basically, within that interview, he omitted the line. He said the line, "Yeah, I want to leave." And then a little bit later, further down the line, there was an issue between Stan and the club about whether or not the club owed him money for him honouring his contract. And somebody from the Nottingham Forest coaching staff had heard this interview I'd done and had heard this line. And they contacted the radio station to say, would you let us have this interview? Because we want to use it as evidence in this case that's going to go to the FA. And of course, the radio station immediately said, "Oh yes, you can have it. You can have it." Now, if they'd come to me, I would have said no, because
see, these days you catch up online. You know, everything's available to listen again, and you don't know clubs are doing that. For example, if that situation arose again,
it was good of him to do the interview for me. It was the relationship that we built over 2 years that ensured that happened. And if the club had come to me, I would have said, I'm afraid, it's been edited, it's been ditched, it's been recycled or whatever. But the radio station were very keen to stay on side with the club because of broadcast rights and things like that. So yes, it was handed over. And I actually had to go down to the FA to potentially be a witness in the case. And if I'd been called in, it would have been very awkward because I couldn't have denied it because the tape was there and they'd listened to the tape. But as we arrived, there was a delegation from Forest, there was me and somebody from the Radio Nottingham station, and there was Stan and his agent. And Stan walked in, and he would have known then there was some evidence from an interview that he'd done with me. So part of me thought, I wonder how he's going to react here. And he was fine, All right, Fish, how are you doing, mate? Yeah, how are you keeping? Da-di-da-di-da. So that interview probably cost him quite a bit of money. But, he was a top fella, and his time at the club was brilliant. He was excellent. But obviously the players, Stuart Pearce, magnificent player. Roy Keane, had the joy of doing him from his first ever game at Liverpool to the cup final and everything. And Nigel Clough, what a player Nigel Clough was. So many really top quality players. And you took it for granted then. And it's only sort of years later that you realise how spoilt you were as a commentator, a reporter, as a supporter, to be watching that kind of talent week in, week out.
Well, thanks to Martin Fisher for all of his stories and his time as well. Thank you to you for watching and subscribing to the Sport Chippers YouTube page. It really does mean a lot. There is plenty on the way. I'm really excited actually about what is coming up. I'm sure you will be if I told you who it was, coming up over the next couple of weeks. So do subscribe, and when any new videos appear, they will appear on your YouTube feed. But from sunny Sydney, for the time being, goodbye.